able to explain themselves on this. And it would be one thing if this were an inter-party fight on a matter of principle, a fight because one side wanted to make a point. But in this case, even the point isn't clear. The only clear message that any Republican has on this tax issue right now is, what are we doing? We look like idiots. That's the only clear message from Republicans right now. And that's the kind of thing that happens when leadership fails. That's what happens when, say, a Republican House Speaker is really bad at his job. And it all came full circle today for John Boehner. On the very first day of John Boehner's tenure as House Speaker, do you remember this? One of the first things he did wrong was that he didn't notice that he'd forgotten to swear in 2 of his own members. Republican Congressman Pete Sessions of Texas and Mike Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, they were not present for the official swearing in, which meant that they technically were not members of Congress. They hadn't been sworn in. Pete Sessions and Mike Fitzpatrick tried to make it better by attempting to swear themselves in by raising their hands at a television set that was showing their colleagues being sworn in. But that's not actually in the Constitution. So despite not being actual members of Congress, these guys started voting on stuff. And then the House had to go back and correct those votes to account for the fact that John Boehner had not made sure that all of his people were physically there to be sworn in. It was a total mess. And even on pedestrian matters such as those, even on the logistics, John Boehner's leadership in the House has just been a mess from the very beginning. Everybody wants to blame those radical Tea Partiers in his caucus. You can't blame the radical Tea Partiers for forgetting to swear in 2 guys. I'm sure that John Boehner's a very nice man. But John Boehner is manifestly bad at the job of being Speaker of the House. And that came full circle for him today. One of the guys who John Boehner forgot to swear in, Congressman Mike Fitzpatrick, he finally is now a duly sworn member of Congress. So Congressman Mike Fitzpatrick today was presiding over the House chamber when the number 2 Democrat in the House, Steny Hoyer, tried to bring the Senate payroll tax cut bill to the floor. And John Boehner's folly, otherwise known as Mike Fitzpatrick, Mike Fitzpatrick apparently had no plan to deal with the Democrats trying to do this. He did not arrange for Republicans to argue against it or to make some procedural move to try to make it look like it was being worked on or something. He didn't do any of the legislative things that help a side win in Washington when they are engaged in a big fight. The way that he dealt with it when the Democrats tried to bring up this bill today is the guy who was the acting Speaker of the House today, Mr. Fitzpatrick, just kind of walked away. He just shuffled off the House floor and walked away. While Steny Hoyer, number 2 House Democrat, thoroughly embarrassed the House Republicans even further.
Pursuant to Section 3B of House Resolution 493, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. on Friday,
Mr. Speaker,
23,
Mr. Speaker,
2011.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask for unanimous consent that we bring up to extend the tax cut for 160 million Americans. As you walk off the floor, Mr. Speaker, you're walking out, you're walking away, just as so many Republicans have walked away from middle-class taxpayers, the unemployed, and very frankly as well from those who will be seeking medical assistance from their doctors, 48 million senior citizens. We regret, Mr. Speaker, that you have walked off the platform without addressing the issue of critical importance to this country.
The John Boehner is bad at his job hypothesis is getting close to graduating into the John Boehner is bad at his job working theory of understanding Washington. Joining us now is Washington Post columnist and MSNBC policy analyst Ezra Klein. Ezra, it's good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Good evening.
Why are we seeing this level of discord among Republicans on the Hill? It seems in part to be logistics. They do not know what they are doing or what they are supposed to be doing next, but it does also seem to be some policy incoherence here.
There was a bit of a collision on the racetrack here. On the one hand, Republicans want to oppose things that Barack Obama would like to do, that President Obama would like to do. And on the other hand, Republicans would like to pass tax cuts. And you see it most clearly in the case of something like the Wall Street Journal. That is the business wing of the Republican Party. And the business wing of the Republican Party doesn't like Barack Obama very much, but they really don't want their taxes to go up. They really don't want to pay more to employ workers. They don't want to have a hit to consumer demand next year. So this is not going to go well for the Republicans until they figure out a way out. And the problem is they sort of thought they had one, at least for a couple of months, and then John Boehner sort of ended the deal. Mitch McConnell thought he was negotiating on behalf of John Boehner. He thought he was negotiating on behalf of the House Republicans, and then it turned out he wasn't. And what people in Washington really don't like is to have a deal they thought they agreed to reneged upon.
Could you see somebody other than Speaker Boehner stepping up to sort of get this job done? And by the job, I mean, in part, the policy tax cut extended, which everybody at least says they want to do, but also in part getting the Republicans back together. Is he the only one that can do it? Because he doesn't seem to be very good at anything that he tries to do.
Speaker Boehner has essentially admitted he can't do it. One of the really interesting movements in this debate over the last week has been that now the big position of House Republicans is there needs to be what's called a conference committee. And a conference committee is when the House and the Senate offer up negotiators who have to deal with the bill together in a room somewhere behind, away from cameras. Now, conference committees have largely disappeared over the last decade. They used to be there because you needed, the leadership needed the very powerful committee chairs to be on board with them. That's what the conference committee was. It got a bunch of people in the room, all of whom had power, and they worked out a deal. As leadership became more powerful, conference committees began to disappear. Boehner needs a conference committee now, and he's tried to appoint House Republicans to a conference committee, despite the fact that the Senate has not been willing to enter into a committee with him, because he needs these other Republicans, these 8 other Republicans who come from different wings of the party, to take the responsibility for the deal. Boehner can't do it himself, so he's got to offload it onto a coalition of other Republicans who hopefully can go back to different parts of his own conference and say to them, look, this is the best we can get. We were in the room. You got to trust us on this one. It is a stunning show that this has really gotten beyond him now, and there's not a single leader anymore in the House Republican conference who you can call and make a deal with.
Isn't it true, though, that even in trying to delegate that responsibility, because he doesn't necessarily have the authority, and as you say, he's sort of trying to push it off onto this conference committee to make them do the hard work rather than him because he can't handle it. Even in doing that, he's screwed up, because the Republican line is that they do actually want the payroll tax cut extended. A majority of the people who he appointed to the conference committee, as far as I understand it, are on record as being against extending the payroll tax cut. So even in trying to save himself, he seems to be continuing to screw up his main message.
Well, to some degree, I wouldn't put it exactly like that. What I would say is that he is trying to reflect to the best extent possible Republican incoherence here, which is, how do you oppose a payroll tax cut while seeming like you're on the side of the payroll tax cut? So if you listen to John Boehner's statements on this, he says continuously, we just want to get into negotiations so we can do what everybody already wants to do, which is extend the payroll tax cut. Everybody does not want to do that. Whenever I hear him say that, I think of that moment in The Social Network when Mark Zuckerberg says, if you had invented Facebook, you would have invented Facebook. If they wanted to extend the payroll tax cut, they would have extended the payroll tax cut. But the Republicans don't want to do that. And yet they keep saying that is their ultimate goal here as they try to negotiate things like the Keystone Oil pipeline or discretionary spending cuts. So right now, Boehner is trying to sort of walk that line, cloud the issue for the American people, say Republicans are on the side of getting this done, but somehow reflect this sort of anti-tax cut majority that is emerging in his own members.
I never mean to imply that John Boehner's job is easy and therefore he should be good at it because it's easy. I think it is a hard job. But boy, if I were a House Republican, or if I were a Republican who was interested in Republican congressional power, I would be really eager to see the northbound side of a southbound John Boehner. So, yeah. Ezra Klein, MSNBC policy analyst and Washington Post columnist. Thanks, Ezra.